In the beginning, there was only chaos, a swirling void of nothingness, dark and boundless, stretching across the emptiness where no light had ever shone. This wasn't merely darkness as we understand it today, but the complete absence of everything. No earth beneath, no sky above, no time to measure, no space to fill. Just chaos, the primordial abyss from which all existence would eventually emerge. But from this nothingness, something extraordinary happened. The first beings began to spontaneously emerge, not born in the way we understand birth, but simply coming into existence through mysterious forces beyond mortal comprehension. First came Gaia, the earth herself, broad-bosomed and eternal, who would become the foundation upon which all life would flourish. She arose not as a mere planet, but as a conscious, powerful deity, the very embodiment of the solid ground that would support mountains, valleys, and all the creatures yet to come. Next emerged Tartarus, that terrible place deep beneath the earth where the darkest souls would one day be punished. This wasn't simply an underground cave, but a cosmic prison, a realm of such depth and horror that even the gods themselves would shudder at its mention. Alongside Tartarus came Eros, the fundamental force of love and desire that would drive all creation forward, the irresistible power that would compel beings to unite, to create, to continue the great work of existence. From chaos also emerged Erebus, the personification of darkness itself, and Nyx, the primordial night. These weren't merely the absence of light, but active forces in their own right, cosmic powers that would play crucial roles in the ordering of the universe. Nyx, especially, would prove to be one of the most formidable powers in all creation, so mighty that even Zeus himself would later show her proper respect. But the real drama began when Gaia, in her cosmic wisdom, decided that she needed a partner equal to herself. Through her own divine will, she brought forth Uranus, the starry sky, to cover her completely and serve as the father of her children. This wasn't a marriage of equals in the way mortals might understand it, but a cosmic union between earth and heaven, the foundation and the dome, the stable and the infinite. Their offspring would be extraordinary beyond imagining. First came the Titans, 12 mighty beings who would rule the cosmos before the Olympian gods we know today. These weren't ordinary children, but cosmic forces in their own right. Oceanus, who would become the great river that encircled the world. Coeus, the embodiment of rational thought and intelligence. Crius, master of the heavenly constellations. Hyperion, who would father the sun, moon, and dawn. Iapetus, ancestor of the human race. And most significantly, Cronus, who would one day overthrow his father and rule the universe himself. The female Titans were equally magnificent. Theia, the divine light that would illuminate the heavens. Rhea, who would become the mother of the Olympian gods. Themis, the personification of divine law and order. Mnemosyne, the living embodiment of memory itself. Phoebe, who would control prophecy and oracular wisdom. And Tethys, the primordial sea goddess who would nurture countless water spirits. But Gaia and Uranus didn't stop with the Titans. They also created the Cyclopes, 3 massive beings with single eyes in the center of their foreheads, master craftsmen who would one day forge Zeus's thunderbolts. Their names were Brontes, Steropes, and Argus, representing thunder, lightning, and the bright flash of electrical fire. These weren't monsters in the way later myths would portray cyclopes, but divine artisans whose skills would prove essential to the gods' eventual victory over the forces of chaos. Even more fearsome were the Hecaton Kyries, the hundred-handed ones. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges possessed 50 heads and 100 arms each, making them perhaps the most powerful beings ever created. Their strength was so immense that they could hurl massive boulders like pebbles, shake mountains with their footsteps, and fight entire armies single-handedly. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Rhaenus, despite being the father of these magnificent beings, grew to hate his own children. Perhaps he feared their power, or maybe he simply couldn't bear the thought of being surpassed by his offspring. Whatever his motivation, he made a decision that would have cosmic consequences. As each child was born, instead of celebrating their arrival, he pushed them back into Gaia's womb, essentially imprisoning them within their mother's body. This wasn't mere cruelty, it was a violation of the natural order itself. Children are meant to be born, to grow, to take their place in the world. By preventing this natural progression, Uranus was essentially stopping time itself, creating a cosmic traffic jam that couldn't continue indefinitely. Gaia, feeling the constant pain of her imprisoned children and the unnatural weight of beings who should have been free, began to plot against her husband. The weapon she created for her revenge was itself a marvel. From the grey adamant, the hardest substance in existence, she forged a great sickle with a serrated edge that could cut through anything, even divine flesh. This wasn't just a tool, but an instrument of cosmic justice, designed specifically to end Uranus's tyrannical rule and free the imprisoned children. Gaia then called her Titan children to council, though they were still trapped within her, and explained her plan. She needed one of them to be brave enough to wield the sickle against their father. Most of the Titans, understandably, were terrified at the thought of attacking the Lord of the Heavens, but Cronus, the youngest and perhaps the most ambitious, stepped forward and agreed to do the deed. The plan they devised was both clever and brutal. Uranus had a habit of coming down each evening to lie with Gaia, and it was during one of these intimate moments that they would strike. As Uranus descended and embraced his wife, Cronus emerged from his hiding place, sickle in hand, and in one swift motion, castrated his father. The aftermath of this act was immediate and far-reaching. As Uranus's severed genitals fell into the sea, they created a white foam from which emerged Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. This is why she's sometimes called Aphrodite, foam-born or sea-born. The blood that dripped from the wound onto the earth gave birth to the Furies, terrible goddesses of vengeance, and the giants, enormous beings who would one day wage war against the Olympian gods. Uranus, wounded and defeated, retreated to the farthest reaches of the sky, but not before delivering a prophecy that would haunt Cronus for the rest of his reign. He declared that just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would Cronus be overthrown by one of his own children. This curse would drive all of Cronus's future actions and ultimately lead to his own downfall. With Uranus gone, Cronus became the undisputed ruler of the cosmos. He freed his siblings from their mother's womb, and together the Titans ushered in what became known as the Golden Age. This was a time of peace and prosperity, when humans lived in harmony with nature, when the earth provided abundantly without need for hard labor, and when death came gently, like sleep, to those who had lived full lives. Cronus married his sister Rhea, and they began to have children of their own. But the prophecy of Uranus haunted Cronus's dreams. He became increasingly paranoid about the possibility of being overthrown, until finally, he made a decision that would prove to be his undoing. Each time Rhea gave birth, Cronus would take the newborn child and swallow it whole, ensuring that none of his offspring could ever grow powerful enough to challenge him. One by one, he devoured his children. First Hestia, who would have become the goddess of the hearth and home. Then Demeter, future goddess of the harvest. Next came Hera, who was destined to be queen of the gods, followed by Hades, the future lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, who would one day rule the seas. Each child disappeared into their father's stomach, alive but trapped, waiting for someone to free them. Rhea, like her mother Gaia before her, could not bear to see this continue. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she devised a plan to save at least one of her children. She traveled to the island of Crete and gave birth in secret to her youngest son Zeus. Then, wrapping a stone in swaddling clothes, she returned to Cronus and presented it to him as their newborn child. Without examining it closely, Cronus swallowed the stone, believing he had consumed another potential threat to his power. Meanwhile, Zeus was hidden away in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete, where he was raised by nymphs and fed on honey and the milk of the goat Amalthea. The Curetes, young warriors devoted to Rhea, would clash their spears against their shields whenever the baby cried, ensuring that Cronus would never hear him and discover the deception. As Zeus grew to manhood, he learned the truth about his father and his siblings. Filled with righteous anger and guided by the wisdom of Metis, a daughter of Oceanus, he prepared to challenge Cronus and free his brothers and sisters. Metis helped him prepare a special potion, a powerful emetic that would force Cronus to vomit up everything he had swallowed. Zeus approached his father, disguised as a cupbearer, and offered him the potion to drink. Cronus, unsuspecting, drank it down and immediately began to regurgitate his children. First came the stone, which Zeus would later set up at Delphi as a monument. Then his 5 siblings emerged, fully grown and ready for battle. They had been conscious all this time within their father's stomach, and they were not happy about their treatment. What followed was a war that would shake the very foundations of the cosmos. The Titanomachy, as this conflict came to be known, lasted for 10 full years. On one side stood the older generation of gods, led by Cronus and most of the Titans. On the other stood Zeus and his siblings, the younger gods who would become known as the Olympians. The war was brutal and seemingly endless. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage, as both possessed immense power and the will to use it. The earth shook with their battles. Mountains were hurled like stones, and the very fabric of reality trembled under the assault. it seemed as though the conflict might continue forever, bringing nothing but destruction to the cosmos. But Zeus proved to be a cleverer strategist than his father. He realized that he needed allies if he was going to win this war. So he descended into Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, who had been imprisoned there since the overthrow of Uranus. In gratitude for their liberation, these powerful beings joined Zeus's cause. The Cyclopes immediately set to work forging weapons for the new gods. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a weapon of such power that it could split mountains and shake the heavens. For Poseidon, they forged a trident that could cause earthquakes and control the seas. For Hades, they crafted a helmet of invisibility that would allow him to move unseen through any realm. The Hecatonchires, with their 100 hands and 50 heads each, became Zeus's secret weapons. When the final battle came, they pelted the Titans with massive boulders, hurling them so fast and in such numbers that they created a stone storm that blotted out the sun. The Titans, overwhelmed by this unprecedented assault, were finally defeated. Most of the Titans were bound in unbreakable chains and cast into Tartarus, where the Hecatonchires became their eternal guards. But Zeus showed mercy to those who had remained neutral or who had actively supported him. Atlas, who had led the Titan forces, received a special punishment. He was condemned to hold up the heavens for all eternity, ensuring that the sky would never again fall upon the earth. With the Titans defeated, Zeus and his siblings divided the cosmos among themselves. Zeus claimed the sky and became king of the gods. Poseidon took dominion over the seas and all bodies of water. Hades became ruler of the underworld and the dead. The earth and Olympus were considered common territory, shared by all the gods. But Zeus's troubles were far from over. Gaia, angered by the imprisonment of her Titan children, stirred up new enemies to challenge the young king of the gods. First came the giants, those beings born from Uranus's blood, who waged a fierce war against Olympus. Then came Typhon, the most terrible monster ever created, a creature so fearsome that when he first appeared, all the gods fled in terror to Egypt, where they disguised themselves as animals to hide from his wrath. Typhon was a being of pure chaos, with 100 dragon heads that breathed fire, voices that could mimic any sound, and a body that stretched from earth to sky. When he and Zeus finally faced each other in single combat, their battle was so fierce that it melted mountains and boiled the seas. Lightning bolts flew like rain, the earth cracked open, and the foundations of the world groaned under the assault. In the end, Zeus's superior strategy and weapons won the day. He managed to trap Typhon under Mount Etna in Sicily, where the monster's struggles still cause volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. With this final victory, Zeus's position as king of the gods was finally secure. The Olympian gods then established their court on Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, where they built palaces of incredible beauty and luxury. Zeus married Hera, his sister, making her queen of the gods, though their relationship would prove to be turbulent due to Zeus's numerous affairs with both goddesses and mortal women. Each of the major Olympian gods took on specific roles and responsibilities. Athena, born from Zeus's head fully grown and armored, became the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Apollo, god of music, poetry, and prophecy, brought culture and enlightenment to both gods and mortals. Artemis, his twin sister, became the goddess of the hunt and protector of young women. Aphrodite, born from the sea foam, ruled over love and beauty. Ares embodied the brutal aspects of war, while Hephaestus became the divine blacksmith, creating wonders from metal and fire. Hermes served as the messenger of the gods and guide for souls traveling to the underworld. Demeter controlled the harvest and the fertility of the earth, ensuring that mortals would have food to sustain them. These 12 Olympian gods would go on to interact with mortals, interfere in human affairs, and create the rich tapestry of stories that we know as Greek mythology. But their power and their personalities were shaped by this foundational story of cosmic succession, of children overthrowing parents, of the old order giving way to the new. The themes established in these earliest myths would echo throughout all of Greek mythology. The tension between order and chaos, the price of power, the inevitability of change, and the complex relationships between family members would appear again and again in the stories of heroes like Perseus, Theseus, and Heracles, in the tragic tales of houses like that of Atreus, and in the great epic cycles of the Trojan War and the adventures of Odysseus. What makes these stories so enduring is that they speak to fundamental human experiences and anxieties. The fear of being replaced by the next generation, the struggle to maintain power and authority, the complex dynamics of family relationships, and the search for meaning in a universe that often seems chaotic and unpredictable. The Greek gods, for all their divine power, were recognizably human in their emotions, their flaws, and their struggles. The story of the Greek gods is ultimately a story about the establishment of order from chaos, but it's also a recognition that this order is always provisional, always under threat, always requiring vigilance and strength to maintain. Zeus may have defeated the Titans and established his reign, but he knew that somewhere, perhaps, his own son might be growing up, destined to overthrow him just as he had overthrown his father. This is why the Greek gods remain relevant today. They represent not just ancient superstitions or primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena, but sophisticated explorations of the human condition. In their struggles with power, love, jealousy, and mortality, we see reflections of our own struggles, our own fears, and our own hopes for meaning and purpose in an uncertain world. From the yawning void of chaos, the first stirrings of existence began to take shape. But this wasn't some gentle awakening. This was the violent birth of reality itself, and the forces that emerged would make even the most twisted family drama look like a children's bedtime story. Out of the primordial darkness came Gaia, the Earth Mother, vast and fertile and absolutely fundamental to everything that would follow. Picture her not as some gentle nature goddess, but as a cosmic force of creation so powerful that she literally became the foundation upon which all existence would rest. Gaia was the earth itself. Every mountain, every valley, every grain of soil that would one day support temples and cities and the footsteps of heroes. But Gaia wasn't alone in this cosmic awakening. Tartarus emerged as well, that terrifying pit in the deepest depths of the earth where the most dangerous beings would eventually be imprisoned. Think of Tartarus as the universe's maximum security prison, a place so far beneath the earth that even the gods would shudder at its mention. This wasn't just a location. Tartarus was a primordial being, a conscious entity of punishment and containment. And then came Eros, but not the chubby cherub with arrows that we might imagine today. This was Eros, the primordial force, the cosmic power of attraction and desire that would drive all creation forward. Without Eros, nothing would ever come together. Nothing would ever mate or merge or create new life. This was the fundamental force that would compel gods and mortals alike to love, to fight, to create, and ultimately to destroy each other in the name of passion. Erebus, the embodiment of darkness itself, also emerged from chaos, bringing with him the concept of shadow and the unknown. And alongside him came Nyx, night personified, whose dark wings would spread across the cosmos each evening, bringing rest to some and terror to others. But here's where things get really interesting and really weird. Gaia, in her infinite cosmic loneliness, decided she needed a partner. So what did she do? She gave birth to one. She literally created Uranus, the sky, to be her equal and her lover. The ancient sources describe this with beautiful but disturbing poetry. She brought forth Uranus to cover her on every side and to be an ever-sure abiding place for the blessed gods. Now, if you think that sounds problematic, just wait. Because Gaia and Uranus immediately began having children together, and their offspring would become some of the most important figures in all of Greek mythology. First came the 12 Titans, 6 male and 6 female, who would eventually rule the cosmos before the Olympians took over. These weren't just powerful beings, they were the personifications of fundamental cosmic principles. There was Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, and his wife Tethys, goddess of fresh water and nursing. Hyperion, the titan of light, married his sister Theia, and together they would produce the sun, moon, and dawn. Coeus represented the intellectual axis around which the heavens revolved, while his wife Phoebe embodied prophetic wisdom. And then there was Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, who would become absolutely crucial to our story in ways that would make your skin crawl. But the Titans weren't Gaia and Uranus's only children. They also produced 3 Cyclopes, not the one-eyed monsters of later myth, but master craftsmen who would eventually forge the weapons of the gods. Their names were Thunder, Lightning, and Bright, and they possessed the power to create instruments of divine warfare that could shake the very foundations of reality. And if that wasn't enough, Gaia and Uranus also gave birth to 3 Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, creatures of such immense power and terrifying appearance that they would become the ultimate weapons in the wars between gods. Each had 50 heads and 100 arms, and their strength was beyond measure. Now here's where the family dysfunction really kicks into high gear. Uranus, upon seeing his children, these titans, cyclopes, and 100-handed ones, was filled with disgust and fear. Some sources say he was horrified by their power, others that he was jealous of their potential. But whatever his motivation, Uranus made a decision that would doom him. He shoved his children back into Gaia's womb the moment they were born, imprisoning them in the depths of the earth. Imagine the cosmic horror of this situation. Gaia, the Earth Mother, was being used as a prison for her own children by her husband's son. The pain was unbearable, both physical and emotional. Her body was stretched and tormented by the titans struggling within her, while her heart broke for her imprisoned offspring. For ages, this situation continued, with Uranus maintaining his tyrannical control over both his wife and his children. But Gaia's pain was transforming into something far more dangerous: rage. And when a cosmic force like Gaia gets angry, the consequences shake the very foundations of reality. In her fury and desperation, Gaia devised a plan that would change everything. She created the first weapon ever made, a sickle of adamantine, a metal harder than diamond and sharper than any earthly blade. This wasn't just a tool, it was an instrument of cosmic revolution, forged from Gaia's pain and determination. Then Gaia called her imprisoned children to her and revealed her plan. She needed one of them to strike down their father, to castrate him and end his tyrannical reign. Most of the Titans recoiled in horror at the thought of such violence against their father. But Cronus, the youngest and most cunning, stepped forward. His agreement to carry out this horrific deed would echo through mythology for generations to come. The trap was set with terrifying precision. When Uranus came to lie with Gaia, as he did each night, Cronus was waiting. Hidden by darkness and armed with his mother's adamantine sickle, he struck with swift brutality. The castration of Uranus was described in the ancient sources with graphic detail that still makes readers uncomfortable thousands of years later. But here's the thing about cosmic violence: it has cosmic consequences. As Uranus's severed genitals fell into the sea, the mixture of divine blood and sea foam gave birth to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. From an act of ultimate violence and betrayal came the force that would drive passion throughout the universe. The irony is almost unbearable, and that wasn't all. Where drops of Uranus's blood hit the earth, they gave birth to the Furies, the Erinyes, goddesses of vengeance who would pursue those who committed crimes against family. The giants also sprang from this divine blood, powerful beings who would one day threaten the gods themselves. Even in his defeat, Uranus ensured that violence and retribution would be woven into the very fabric of reality. With his dying breath, Uranus cursed his son Cronus, prophesying that Cronus too would be overthrown by one of his own children. This curse would hang over Cronus for the rest of his reign, driving him to acts of paranoia and cruelty that would make his father's crimes seem almost gentle by comparison. And so ended the reign of Uranus, the first king of the cosmos. His overthrow marked the end of the primordial age and the beginning of something new, the age of the Titans, with Cronus as their king. But as we'll see, the patterns established in this first cosmic revolution, the cycles of violence, betrayal, and succession, would repeat themselves with even greater intensity in the generations to come. The lesson was clear. Power in the cosmos was not inherited peacefully, but seized through violence, and every king carried within himself the seeds of his own destruction. The children would always rise against the fathers, and the wheel of cosmic succession would continue to turn, grinding heroes and tyrants alike beneath its inexorable weight. Achilles' wrath had finally cooled to embers, but the war itself burned on with relentless fury. The funeral fires of Hector had barely dimmed when new champions arrived at Troy's gates, drawn by the promise of glory and the scent of approaching doom. From the distant lands of the Amazons came Penthesilea, daughter of Ares himself, leading 12 warrior queens whose skill with spear and bow rivaled that of any hero. These were women who had chosen the path of war over the traditional roles of wife and mother, who rode horses like centaurs and fought with a ferocity that made even battle-hardened Trojans step back in awe. Penthesilea was magnificent in her bronze armor, tall as a goddess with eyes like storm clouds and hair that flowed like liquid gold beneath her crested helmet. She had come to Troy not for treasure or territory, but for something far more precious: the chance to test herself against the greatest warrior of the age. The Amazon queen burned with a desire to face Achilles in single combat, to either claim immortal glory by defeating him or die gloriously in the attempt. When she entered Troy through the Scaean gates, the very stones seemed to sing. The Trojan people, desperate for hope after losing their greatest defender, saw in this magnificent warrior woman a sign that the gods had not entirely abandoned them. Priam himself, aged beyond his years by grief and siege, felt his heart lift for the first time since Hector's death. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything the war had yet witnessed. Penthesilea led her Amazons in a charge that shattered the Argive front lines like pottery against bronze. Her spear found its mark with every thrust. Her sword sang its deadly song, and where she rode, enemy warriors fell like wheat before the scythe. But fate had already written the ending to this particular song. When Achilles finally faced the Amazon queen in single combat, the outcome was as inevitable as sunrise. Yet, in the moment when his spear pierced her heart, something extraordinary happened. As her helmet fell away and he saw her face clearly for the first time, Achilles felt a pain deeper than grief, the agony of love discovered too late. Penthesilea died beautiful and brave, and in her final moments, some say she smiled, having achieved what she came for, a glorious death at the hands of the world's greatest warrior. Achilles wept over her body, as he had once wept for Patroclus, and the watching armies fell silent before this display of warrior's remorse. From the distant shores of Ethiopia came another champion who would test the son of Peleus. Memnon, son of the dawn goddess Eos, arrived with an army of dark-skinned warriors whose bronze armor gleamed like the sun itself. This prince of the morning possessed divine blood equal to Achilles' own, and when he stood before Troy's walls, even the stones seemed to recognize the presence of destiny. Memnon was everything a hero should be: tall and handsome, skilled with every weapon, generous to his friends and terrible to his enemies. His very presence rekindled hope in Trojan hearts and struck fear into Argive souls. Here was a champion who might actually prove Achilles' equal, who possessed the divine heritage necessary to stand against the son of Thetis. The duel between these two demigod princes became the stuff of legend even as it unfolded. For hours they fought, bronze against bronze, divine strength against divine skill. The earth trembled beneath their feet. The air sang with the music of clashing weapons, and both armies watched in awed silence as two sons of goddesses played out their deadly dance. In the end, it was experience that proved decisive. Achilles had been forged in the crucible of 9 years' warfare, had learned his deadly craft through countless battles against the finest warriors of Troy. Memnon, for all his divine heritage and natural skill, could not match the terrible expertise that only constant warfare could provide. When the Ethiopian prince fell, his mother Eos wept tears that became the morning dew, and Zeus himself granted her son a form of immortality, transformation into a bird that would sing each dawn in memory of the hero's glory. But for Achilles, this victory brought no joy, only the growing certainty that his own end drew near. The prophecies were clear now, spoken in the wind and written in the flight of birds. Paris and Apollo waited somewhere in his future, the archer god's silver bow already drawn, the arrow nocked that would find the one vulnerable spot where mortality touched even the greatest of heroes. Each victory brought him closer to that moment, each fallen enemy another step on the path to his own doom. But before that fated arrow found its mark, one more great deed awaited. The war itself had reached a stalemate that conventional warfare could not break. Troy's walls, built by gods, remained impregnable to direct assault. The Argive forces, depleted by 10 years of siege, lacked the strength for another massive offensive. What was needed was not force, but cunning, the kind of subtle stratagem that only one man among all the heroes possessed. Odysseus, the fox of Ithaca, had been watching and waiting, his clever mind spinning plans within plans. He understood what his more straightforward companions could not grasp, that Troy would never fall to honest warfare. The city's walls were too strong, its defenders too brave, its position too advantageous. Victory would require deception on a scale that would make the gods themselves marvel at mortal ingenuity. The plan that emerged from Odysseus's fertile imagination was audacious beyond belief. The Argives would appear to abandon their siege, sailing away as if finally defeated after 10 years of fruitless effort. But they would leave behind a gift, a massive wooden horse, supposedly an offering to Athena to ensure safe passage home. Hidden within this hollow construction would be the greatest heroes of the Argive host, ready to emerge once the horse had been brought within Troy's walls. While the city celebrated what appeared to be their victory, these hidden warriors would open the gates for the main army, which would return under cover of darkness to complete the destruction that 10 years of open warfare had been unable to achieve. The construction of the horse became a masterwork of both engineering and artistry. Epius, the master craftsman, created a hollow marvel large enough to hold dozens of warriors, yet beautiful enough to convince the Trojans of its divine purpose. Every detail was carefully planned, from the hidden door that would allow the warriors to emerge, to the breathing holes disguised as decorative elements. The psychological aspects of the deception were equally crucial. Sinon, a relative of Odysseus, volunteered for perhaps the most dangerous role of all, remaining behind to convince the Trojans that the horse was indeed a sacred offering. His story was carefully crafted. He was a deserter from the Argive army, left behind by vengeful commanders who had discovered his supposed crimes. When the Trojan scouts found the empty Argive camp and the massive horse standing alone on the beach, the sight must have seemed like the answer to 10 years of prayers. The enemy ships had vanished beyond the horizon. Their camps lay abandoned, and only this magnificent wooden offering remained as evidence of their presence. The debate that followed in Troy's council chambers would echo through history. Cassandra, the prophetic daughter of Priam, who was cursed never to be believed, screamed warnings about the horse that none would heed. Laocoon, the priest of Poseidon, hurled his spear at the horse's side and declared that Greeks bearing gifts were never to be trusted. But the gods themselves seemed to support the deception. When Laocoon prepared to sacrifice to Poseidon, 2 enormous sea serpents emerged from the waves and crushed both the priest and his sons in their coils. To the watching Trojans, this divine intervention seemed clear confirmation that the horse was indeed sacred, and that Laocoon's opposition had earned celestial punishment. Sinon's performance was masterful. With tears streaming down his face, he told his carefully rehearsed tale of betrayal and abandonment, of how the horse had been built as an offering to Athena to ensure the Argives' safe return home. The size of the construction, he explained, was deliberate, made too large to fit through Troy's gates so that the Trojans could never claim the goddess's favor for themselves. This detail proved to be the stroke of genius that sealed Troy's fate. Rather than leaving the horse outside their walls, the Trojans became determined to bring it within the city, even if doing so required partially dismantling the very fortifications that had protected them for 10 years. The psychology was perfect. By making the horse seem deliberately inaccessible, Odysseus had made the Trojans desperate to possess it. The night of Troy's fall began with celebration. For the first time in a decade, the city's gates stood open without fear. Wine flowed freely, music filled the streets, and the people of Troy gave themselves over to joy at their apparent deliverance. The wooden horse stood in the central square like a monument to their victory, admired by crowds who saw in it proof that even the mightiest enemies could be defeated. But as darkness deepened and exhausted celebration gave way to sleep, the hidden door in the horse's belly opened silently. One by one, the greatest heroes of the Argive host emerged. Odysseus himself, Menelaus burning for revenge, Diomedes still terrible in war, and others whose names had become synonymous with martial prowess. Their first task was to signal the returning fleet. Fire signals blazed from Troy's highest tower, calling back the ships that had hidden behind the nearby island of Tenedos. As the main army approached the now undefended walls, the heroes within the city moved to secure the gates and eliminate any guards who might raise an alarm. The slaughter that followed was systematic and merciless. This was not the clean combat of heroic warfare, but the brutal efficiency of a city taken by storm. Houses burned, families fled, screaming through streets that ran red with blood, and the accumulated wealth of centuries was seized by vengeful conquerors. King Priam met his end at the altar of Zeus Herkaios in his own palace, cut down by Neoptolemus, the young son of Achilles, who had inherited all his father's skill in war, but none of his occasional mercy. The old king's death was neither noble nor heroic. merely the confused end of a man who had outlived his time and watched his world crumble around him. Hector's infant son Astyanax was hurled from the city's walls, a brutal act designed to ensure that no heir could grow up to claim vengeance. The child's death represented the final severing of Troy's future, the absolute end of any possibility that the royal line might continue. But perhaps the most tragic fate befell Cassandra, the prophet whose warnings had gone unheeded. She was dragged from Athena's temple by Ajax the Lesser, her violation of sanctuary adding sacrilege to the night's catalogue of horrors. This act of impiety would later bring divine vengeance upon the Argive fleet. But on that night of Troy's fall, the gods seemed to have turned their faces away from justice. Helen, the cause of all this destruction, was found cowering in her chambers. When Menelaus burst in with sword drawn, ready to claim the revenge he had dreamed of for 10 years, her beauty once again proved stronger than his rage. The sword fell from nerveless fingers as love and desire reasserted their ancient power over his heart. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins, the great city that had withstood 10 years of siege lay in ashes. The towers that had seemed to touch the sky were broken stones. The walls that gods had built were breached and shattered, and the people who had called Troy home were dead, enslaved, or scattered to the winds. The victorious Argives gathered their spoils and prepared for the journey home. But they had forgotten something crucial in their moment of triumph: that the gods who had allowed Troy's destruction were not finished with their manipulations. The same divine forces that had orchestrated the city's fall would now turn their attention to the victors, and the homecoming that should have been a celebration would become a series of tragedies that would scatter the heroes across the wine-dark sea. The wooden horse stood empty now in Troy's ruined square, its purpose fulfilled. It had been the instrument of the city's doom, the final stratagem in a war that had consumed a generation. But it was also something more, a symbol of how intelligence could triumph over strength, how cunning could succeed where courage had failed, how the mind of one clever man could accomplish what 10 years of heroic warfare could not. As the smoke from Troy's funeral pyre rose to join the clouds, the greatest siege in history was finally over. The city that had seemed eternal had proven as mortal as the heroes who died beneath its walls. The war that had begun with a golden apple and a judgment clouded by desire had ended with wooden deception and the screams of the dying. The age of heroes was passing away, and with it, the world that had given birth to such magnificent and terrible deeds. The survivors would carry the memory of Troy to distant shores, and poets yet unborn would sing of its glory and its fall. But the city itself was gone forever, its stones scattered, its people vanished, its name destined to become a byword for the price of pride and the wages of war. The wind carried the ashes across the plain where so many heroes had died, mixing the dust of kings and commoners, victors and vanquished, until none could tell one from another in death's democracy. Somewhere in the ruins, a nightingale sang of sorrows yet to come, its voice lost in the vast indifference of the star-scattered sky. The sun rises over the wine-dark sea, painting Troy's walls in shades of blood and gold, as our tale continues, where wrath left its mark. The funeral pyres of heroes have burned to ash. the greatest champions lie silent in their tombs, and yet the war that began with a golden apple still rages on. For though Achilles has claimed his vengeance, and Hector's honor has been restored, the fates have woven threads of destiny that stretch far beyond any single hero's glory or grief. In the shadowed halls of Olympus, where ambrosia flows like wine and divine politics shape mortal destinies, the immortals gather once more. But now their attention turns not to the familiar faces who have dominated this conflict for 9 long years, but to new champions rising from distant lands. The war that started as a dispute between Greeks and Trojans is about to become something far grander and more terrible. A clash of civilizations that will draw warriors from the very edges of the known world. Zeus, the cloud gatherer, sits upon his golden throne and contemplates the scales of fate. The death of Troy's greatest defender has tipped the balance, but not toward the swift conclusion many expected. Instead, new weights are being added to both sides of the cosmic equation. From the sunrise lands beyond the great river that circles the earth, an army marches westward, led by a prince whose skin gleams like burnished bronze and whose spear has never known defeat. From the land of warrior women, where daughters learn to draw the bow before they can walk, a queen rides north with her Amazons, seeking glory in the shadow of Troy's walls. These are the allies that King Priam's desperate envoys have summoned in the dark hours after Hector's death. Gold and promises of eternal glory have brought him champions whose very names strike fear into the hearts of distant peoples. But the Greeks too have sent their messengers racing across the wine-dark seas, calling upon old debts and sacred oaths to bring fresh strength to their cause. The war that began with 1,000 ships is about to welcome 1,000 more. Yet even as these new players enter our tale, the original heroes continue their eternal dance of glory and doom. Achilles, having tasted the sweet wine of vengeance, finds that it has left him thirsting for something deeper. The rage that sustained him through Patroclus's death and Hector's destruction has cooled to embers, leaving behind a terrible emptiness that no amount of killing can fill. In the pre-dawn darkness, he stands beside his ships and watches the stars wheel overhead, each point of light a reminder that his own time grows short. The prophecies have not been forgotten. Paris and Apollo wait somewhere beyond tomorrow's horizon. The archer god's silver bow already drawn, the arrow nocked that will find the one vulnerable spot where mortality touches even the greatest of heroes. But before that final arrow flies, before the wooden horse casts its shadow across Troy's walls, other stories must unfold. Other heroes must rise and fall. Other loves must bloom and wither. Other choices must be made that will echo through the ages. For this is the nature of epic tales. They grow like mighty trees, sending out branches that spawn their own legends. The trunk of our story remains the wrath of Achilles and its consequences. But now we follow the spreading canopy to discover what other fruits this war has borne. We shall meet the Amazon queen whose beauty rivals Helen's and whose skill in battle surpasses that of many men. We shall witness the coming of Memnon, son of the dawn, whose armor blazes like the sunrise, and whose fate is intertwined with that of Achilles himself. We shall see how Odysseus, the fox of Ithaca, weaves the stratagem that will finally bring Troy's walls tumbling down. We shall follow brave Diomedes as he faces challenges that test not just his strength, but his very understanding of what it means to be heroic. We shall watch as Ajax the Great, tower of Greek strength, confronts a doom more terrible than any enemy's spear, the darkness that can consume a warrior's soul when honor becomes obsession. But perhaps most importantly, we shall discover how the seeds of Troy's destruction were planted not by Greek cunning or divine wrath alone, but by the city's own choices. How pride and stubbornness, the very virtues that made Troy great, become the flaws that ensure its fall. How the bonds of family and duty that give life meaning can also become chains that drag the innocent down into darkness. The women of Troy move through our tale like threads of gold woven through dark tapestry. Hecuba, the Queen Mother, whose dreams of serpents and burning towers prove all too prophetic. Andromache, the widow whose love transcends death itself. Cassandra, the prophetess cursed to speak truth that none will believe, watching helplessly as every disaster she foretells comes to pass. And Helen herself, the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships, now trapped in a city that both loves and hates her, knowing that her very existence has become a curse upon all who shelter her. The gods too continue their eternal machinations, though their attention begins to turn toward the greater patterns that govern mortal existence. Athena and Aphrodite maintain their ancient grudge, each seeking to prove the superiority of wisdom over beauty, or beauty over wisdom. Apollo tends his beloved Trojans while knowing that his protection can only delay, not prevent, their ultimate fate. And Zeus himself, bound by prophecies older than memory, watches the working out of destinies that even he cannot alter. But threading through all these grand themes of fate and heroism, love and loss, runs a more intimate story, the tale of how war changes those who fight it. We shall see young men who sailed from Greece as boys return as hollow-eyed veterans, if they return at all. We shall witness the transformation of Troy from a proud city into a fortress under siege, where children grow up knowing no world beyond the shadow of war. We shall explore how the very values that make civilization possible, hospitality, honor, respect for the gods, become weapons turned against their believers. The Trojan War, in its final phase, becomes a meditation on the price of greatness. Every victory carries the seeds of future sorrow. Every act of heroism demands payment in blood and tears. The warriors who achieve immortal glory through their deeds purchase that immortality with their lives, leaving behind widows and orphans to mourn their absence. The city that refuses to surrender its honor faces annihilation as the price of that refusal. Yet for all its darkness, our tale is not without light. In the midst of devastating war, we find moments of transcendent beauty. A warrior's prayer to his gods, a mother's lullaby to her child, a poet's song that transforms suffering into art. We discover that human dignity can shine brightest in the darkest hours, that love can endure even when hope is lost, that the very fragility of mortal life gives it a preciousness that the immortal gods can only envy. The techniques of warfare evolve throughout our story, as both sides adapt to new challenges and develop new strategies. The static siege of the early years gives way to dynamic campaigns that range across the Trojan plain and beyond. Naval battles complement the land fighting as both sides seek to control the sea routes that supply their armies. The introduction of new allies brings fresh tactical approaches that force commanders to rethink their assumptions about how battles should be fought. But more profound than any tactical innovation is the psychological evolution of the warriors themselves. Men who began this conflict fighting for glory and honor find themselves motivated by grimmer purposes: survival, vengeance, the desperate hope of seeing home again. The clear moral distinctions that seemed so obvious in the war's early days blur as atrocities mount on both sides, and the innocent suffer alongside the guilty. Religious practices too change under the pressure of endless conflict. The gods who once seemed reliable protectors become capricious forces whose favor must be constantly courted and whose wrath must be perpetually appeased. Sacrifice and ritual take on new urgency as both sides seek divine intervention to break the stalemate that has consumed so many lives. Some warriors lose their faith entirely, while others cling to it with desperate intensity, finding in prayer and offering their only refuge from the war's brutality. The economy of warfare creates its own dynamics as both sides struggle to maintain armies in the field for years on end. Troy's wealth, accumulated through centuries of peaceful trade, gradually depletes under the strain of constant siege. The Greek alliance, held together initially by shared purpose and mutual benefit, begins to fray as the costs mount and the rewards seem ever more distant. Piracy and raiding become necessary supplements to formal military action as both sides seek the resources needed to continue fighting. Cultural exchange, ironically, flourishes even in the midst of hostility. Greek warriors learn Trojan fighting techniques, while Trojans adopt innovations developed by their besiegers. Languages blend as prisoners, and deserters carry words and concepts across battle lines. Artistic styles influence each other as craftsmen observe foreign techniques and adapt them to local tastes. Even in war, human creativity finds ways to transcend the barriers that divide peoples. The role of women in this martial society reveals itself in countless ways throughout our continuing tale. Beyond the famous figures who shape great events, we see the ordinary women who keep civilization functioning while their men fight and die. The priestesses who maintain religious observances, the craftswomen who produce the goods that armies need, the mothers who raise children in the shadow of war, all play their parts in the grand tragedy that unfolds. Trade networks, disrupted but not destroyed by the conflict, create unexpected connections between distant lands. Merchants who brave the dangers of war-torn seas carry not just goods but information, spreading news of the great conflict to peoples who know Troy and Greece only as names in sailors' tales. Some of these distant observers begin to see opportunity in the mutual destruction of two great powers, laying plans that will reshape the Eastern Mediterranean when the war finally ends. The younger generation that has grown up during the war represents both hope and tragedy for the future. Children who have known nothing but conflict carry within them the seeds of either healing or continued violence. Some, like Astyanax, Hector's young son, become symbols of innocence destroyed by adult ambitions. Others, like Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, embody the continuation of heroic traditions into a new and darker age. Environmental factors play an increasing role as the war drags on. The plain of Troy, once fertile farmland, becomes a scarred wasteland marked by burial mounds and abandoned fortifications. The great forests that once covered the surrounding hills disappear as both sides harvest timber for ships, siege engines, and funeral pyres. Even the rivers run differently, their course is altered by the detritus of war and the earthworks of besiegers. Magic and prophecy weave through the story with increasing frequency as mortals seek supernatural solutions to what seem like insoluble problems. Seers and oracles find themselves in high demand as military commanders seek glimpses of the future that might provide strategic advantage. Curses and blessings become weapons of war as potent as bronze spears and sharp swords. The boundary between the natural and supernatural blurs as desperate times call for desperate measures. The concept of heroism itself undergoes transformation as the war's character changes. The individual duels between champions that mark the conflict's early phases give way to larger, more complex battles, where victory depends more on coordination and endurance than on personal prowess. Young warriors who dream of achieving the glory won by Achilles and Hector find that the opportunities for such individual distinction have largely passed, replaced by the grinding necessity of collective action. Political intrigue becomes increasingly important as both sides seek advantages that cannot be won through direct military action. Assassination plots, bribery attempts, and diplomatic missions multiply as leaders explore alternatives to the frontal assaults that have proven so costly. The war of spears and shields is supplemented by a war of whispers and gold, fought in palace corridors and merchant houses rather than on open battlefields. The treatment of prisoners and the conduct of warfare itself evolves as both sides grapple with the moral implications of prolonged conflict. Early chivalrous customs give way to harsher practices as compassion becomes a luxury that few can afford. Yet even in this darkening atmosphere, individual acts of mercy and honor shine like stars in a moonless sky, reminding us that human decency can survive even the worst circumstances. Medical knowledge advances rapidly under the pressure of treating countless battle wounds. Physicians who began the war with limited understanding of anatomy and healing develop new techniques through grim necessity. The care of wounded warriors becomes a science in its own right, with implications that extend far beyond the immediate needs of military medicine. The chroniclers and poets who record these events for posterity find their role changing as well. No longer content to simply celebrate heroic deeds, they begin to grapple with the deeper meanings of the conflict they witness. The songs they sing around campfires carry not just tales of glory, but meditations on the costs of war and the nature of human destiny. These artists become the memory of their civilization, preserving not just facts, but the emotional truth of what it means to live through such times. As our tale continues, all these threads will weave together into a tapestry of unprecedented complexity and beauty. The simple story of a war between two cities expands to encompass questions that will resonate through all of human history. What is the proper relationship between individual desire and collective responsibility? How should mortals conduct themselves when they know their time is limited? What makes life worth living when death is always near? How can we find meaning in suffering, purpose in chaos, hope in darkness? The answers to these questions will not come easily or simply. They will emerge gradually through the actions and choices of characters who often do not fully understand the implications of their decisions. Heroes will make choices that doom them while thinking they choose glory. Lovers will sacrifice everything for passion only to discover that their sacrifice was meaningless. Kings will preserve their honor at the cost of their kingdoms, while wise men will watch helplessly as their wisdom goes unheeded. But in the end, our tale will reveal that even in failure, even in defeat, even in death itself, human beings can achieve a kind of victory through the simple act of remaining true to their deepest values. The city of Troy may fall, its walls may crumble, its people may be scattered to the winds, but the courage and love and loyalty that its defenders display in their final hours will echo through eternity. The Greek heroes may win their war only to discover that victory has cost them everything they held dear, but their willingness to pay that price for their ideals will inspire generations yet unborn. This is the story we now continue to tell, not just of a war between mortals, but of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, meaning and meaninglessness, hope and despair that defines the human condition. It is a story that began before Troy was built and will continue long after its stones have crumbled to dust. For as long as human beings must choose between comfort and honor, between safety and glory, between the easy path and the right path, the echoes of this ancient war will continue to resonate in their hearts. The dawn breaks over the Trojan plain, and new heroes stride forth to meet their destinies. The stage is set for the final acts of this great drama, where gods and mortals alike will discover that some choices, once made, can never be unmade, and some prices, once paid, can never be refunded. Let us follow where their footsteps lead, into the gathering storm that will reshape the world. In the beginning, before the ordered cosmos we know today, there was only chaos, a gaping void, a yawning darkness that stretched endlessly in all directions. This was not mere emptiness, but something far more profound, the primordial state from which all existence would emerge. From this swirling, formless abyss, the first divine beings came into existence through mysterious forces that even the gods themselves could not fully comprehend. First emerged Gaia, the earth herself, not merely the ground beneath our feet, but the very foundation of all life, the nurturing mother from whose body all other beings would spring. She arose vast and eternal, her form encompassing mountains and valleys, rivers and plains, providing the stable foundation upon which the ordered world could be built. Gaia was both gentle mother and terrible force, capable of bringing forth life in abundance or swallowing it whole in her wrath. From the depths came Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit beneath the earth, a place so far below the surface that a bronze anvil dropped from earth would fall for 9 days before reaching its shadowy depths. This would become the prison of the gods, where divine justice would exile those who threatened the cosmic order. Tartarus was not merely a location, but a primordial deity himself, representing the ultimate punishment and the furthest extremes of divine power. Alongside these fundamental forces arose Eros, the primordial deity of love and desire, not the cherubic figure of later imagination, but an ancient cosmic force whose power could overwhelm gods and mortals alike. This Eros represented the fundamental drive that would bring beings together, creating the unions from which new generations of gods would spring. Without this primordial love, the universe would have remained forever sterile and unchanging. Erebus emerged as the personification of darkness itself, while his sister Nyx embodied the night. These twin powers of shadow and darkness were not evil, but necessary, representing the hidden mysteries, the unknown depths, and the restorative power of rest and dreams. Nyx would become one of the most respected deities, so powerful that even Zeus himself would hesitate to cross her. From these primordial beings, the first generation of deities began to emerge. Gaia, in her creative power, brought forth Uranus, the starry sky who would stretch over her like a cosmic dome, covering her completely and becoming both her equal and her first consort. This Sky Father possessed the vast authority of the heavens, ruling over the celestial realm with absolute power, but his authority would prove both blessing and curse for his offspring. The union of earth and sky produced the first generation of truly divine beings, the 12 Titans, whose names would echo through eternity. There was Oceanus, the vast river that encircled the entire world, and his wife Tethys, mother of all rivers and springs. Hyperion embodied the light of the sun, while his sister Thea represented the divine light that makes precious metals and gems sparkle. Rhea would become the mother of the Olympian gods, while Cronus would inherit his father's throne through an act of violence that would define the nature of divine succession for generations. Alongside the Titans came 3 Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, whose names meant thunder, lightning, and bright flash. These master craftsmen possessed supernatural skill in metalworking and would eventually forge the weapons that would decide the fate of the cosmos. Their single eyes blazed like the sun, and their strength could shake mountains, but their wisdom and loyalty would make them invaluable allies to the eventual victors in the cosmic struggles to come. The third group of children were the 3 Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, named Briareos, Cottus, and Gyges. Each possessed 50 heads and 100 arms of incredible strength, making them the ultimate warriors when divine conflicts required overwhelming force. These giants represented the raw, untamed power of nature itself, capable of hurling mountains like stones and devastating entire regions with their fury. But Uranus, despite his role in creating these mighty offspring, was filled with fear and hatred at their immense power. Perhaps he saw in them the potential for his own overthrow, or perhaps their alien nature disturbed his sense of cosmic order. Whatever his motivation, the Sky Father made a decision that would doom him. Immediately after each child was born, he seized them and thrust them back into Gaia's womb, imprisoning them in the dark depths of the earth where they could never challenge his authority. This cruel treatment caused Gaia tremendous pain, both the physical agony of being forced to contain her fully grown children and the emotional anguish of a mother whose offspring were denied their rightful place in the world. The Earth Mother's grief transformed into a terrible anger that would reshape the cosmos. she began to plot revenge against her husband, determining that his tyranny must end, even if it meant destroying the very order he represented. In the depths of her being, Gaia crafted a weapon worthy of divine conflict, a great sickle made of adamant, the hardest substance in existence, with an edge sharp enough to cut through divine flesh. This was no mere tool, but an instrument of cosmic justice, created specifically to end the reign of the tyrant sky. When it was complete, she called her imprisoned children to her and revealed her plan. Only one of the Titans had the courage to wield the weapon against their father. Cronus, the youngest but most ambitious of Uranus's sons, accepted the adamant sickle and agreed to commit the deed that would free his siblings and end their father's oppression. This act would establish a pattern of generational conflict that would define divine politics. The young overthrowing the old, sons replacing fathers, new orders emerging from the destruction of the previous ones. The opportunity came when Uranus descended from the heavens to lie with Gaia, as was his custom. As the Sky Father spread himself over the earth in cosmic embrace, Cronus emerged from hiding with the adamant sickle gleaming in his hands. With a single, terrible stroke, he severed his father's genitals, casting them far out into the sea, where they would float upon the waves, surrounded by white foam. The castration of Uranus marked the end of the first cosmic age and the beginning of profound changes in the divine order. As the sky god's blood fell upon Gaia, it gave birth to new and terrible beings, the Erinyes, or Furies, who would pursue those guilty of crimes against family. The Giants, who would one day wage war against the Olympian gods, and the Meliae, the ash tree nymphs who would become the mothers of the Bronze Age race of humans. But the most significant birth came from the castrated genitals themselves as they floated upon the Mediterranean waves. From the mixture of divine seed and sea foam arose Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, whose power would prove every bit as dangerous and transformative as the violence that had created her. She emerged fully grown and radiantly beautiful, stepping onto the shores of Cyprus while flowers bloomed in her footsteps and the very air shimmered with desire. With Uranus overthrown and mutilated, Cronus assumed the throne of the cosmos and freed his siblings from their earthly prison. The Titans emerged blinking into the light of day. Their long imprisonment ended and began to establish their own domains within the newly ordered universe. This was the golden age of the Titans, when these mighty deities ruled the cosmos with wisdom and brought prosperity to the world. Cronus proved to be a more benevolent ruler than his father, at least initially. Under his reign, the earth brought forth its fruits without the need for labor. Humans lived in harmony with nature and with each other, and war was unknown. This was the age that later generations would remember as Paradise Lost, when the world was young and innocent, and suffering had not yet entered into creation. But even in this golden time, the seeds of future conflict were already planted. Gaia and Uranus, despite their enmity, delivered a prophecy to Cronus that would poison his peace of mind. One of his own children would overthrow him just as he had overthrown his father. This prediction would drive the Titan King to acts of desperation that would ensure its own fulfillment, demonstrating the inexorable nature of fate even among the gods. The Titans themselves established the fundamental structures of the cosmos that would endure even after their eventual defeat. Oceanus and Tethys ruled the waters, creating the rivers and springs that would nourish all life. Hyperion and Theia governed the celestial lights, establishing the movements of sun, moon, and stars that would mark the passage of time. Chaos and Phoebe presided over intellectual pursuits and prophecy, while Crius organized the constellations and seasons. Most importantly for the future of the cosmos, Cronus took as his wife his sister Rhea, beginning the divine marriage that would produce the next generation of gods. Rhea embodied the fertile, nurturing aspects of earth and motherhood, serving as a perfect complement to Cronus's more structured, temporal authority. Their union represented the harmony between male and female principles that was necessary for cosmic stability. But as Rhea began to bear children, the dark prophecy that haunted Cronus's mind drove him to repeat his father's crimes in an even more horrific form. Unlike Uranus, who had merely imprisoned his offspring, Cronus chose to devour his children immediately upon their birth, swallowing them whole to prevent any possibility of rebellion. One by one, the future Olympian gods, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, disappeared into their father's maw, alive but trapped in his divine stomach. Rhea's anguish at watching her children devoured grew with each birth, until she could bear it no longer. When she felt the pangs of labor with her sixth child, she fled to the island of Crete and gave birth in secret within a hidden cave on Mount Ida. This child was Zeus, destined to become the king of the gods, and his mother was determined that he would not share the fate of his siblings. The infant Zeus was hidden away and raised by the nymphs and the goat Amalthea, whose milk nourished the future god-king. To mask the sound of his cries, the Curates, young warriors devoted to Rhea, danced around the cave, clashing their shields and spears in a wild, cacophonous ritual. Meanwhile, Rhea returned to Cronus carrying a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, which the Titan King swallowed without question, believing he had once again prevented the prophecy's fulfillment. Zeus grew to maturity in secret, developing the strength and wisdom that would make him the greatest of the gods. When he reached adulthood, he determined to free his siblings and claim his rightful place as ruler of the cosmos. With the help of Metis, a Titaness, whose name meant cunning intelligence, he prepared a potion that would force Cronus to regurgitate the children he had swallowed. Disguising himself as a cupbearer, Zeus approached his father and offered him the prepared drink. The potion worked immediately. Cronus vomited up first the stone he had swallowed last, then each of Zeus's siblings in reverse order. Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia emerged fully grown and ready for battle, their long imprisonment having only strengthened their resolve to overthrow the tyrant who had devoured them. But Cronus would not yield his throne easily, and the resulting conflict would determine not just who ruled the cosmos, but what kind of universe it would become. The stage was set for the Titanomachy, The great war between the Titans and the Olympians that would rage for 10 years and reshape the very foundations of reality. This would be the final test of the old order, and from its resolution would emerge the divine hierarchy that would govern gods and mortals for all the ages to come. The seeds of cosmic revolution had been planted in the moment of Zeus's birth, nurtured by a mother's love and a young god's determination to claim justice. The golden age of the Titans was about to end, and the age of the Olympians was about to begin. But first would come war. A conflict so vast and terrible that its echoes would reverberate through every corner of creation. The greatest of all warriors sat motionless by his black ships, his divine armor untouched, his terrible spear gathering dust. 9 years of siege had raged across the wine-dark plain of Troy, yet Achilles, son of Peleus, remained apart from the struggle that had consumed an entire generation of heroes. His withdrawal was not born of cowardice. No man alive could question the courage of one who had never known defeat, but of something far more dangerous. Wounded pride that had curdled into implacable wrath. The quarrel that had driven the mightiest champion from the field seemed to outside observers almost petty. A dispute over a captive girl, Briseis, taken as his prize of honor, but seized by King Agamemnon to replace his own concubine when divine plague forced him to return her to her father. Yet this seemingly small theft struck at the very heart of heroic society. Honor was not mere vanity among these bronze-clad warriors. It was the substance of their immortal souls, the measure by which heroes were weighed against the turning of fate's great wheel. So Achilles brooded, nursing his grievance like a sacred flame, while his myrmidons polished their unused weapons, and his divine horses pawed the earth in frustration. His mother, the sea goddess Thetis, had secured from Zeus himself a promise that the Greeks would suffer until they learned the worth of the warrior they had dishonored. That promise was being fulfilled with compound interest. The tide of war had turned decisively against the invaders, and now Hector led the Trojans in their greatest triumph, driving the enemy back to their very ships. The wooden walls that had once seemed so mighty now blazed with enemy fire. Panic spread through the Greek ranks like plague, and desperate men spoke of abandoning the siege that had cost them so much. In this darkest hour, when hope flickered like a dying flame, the Greek commanders finally swallowed their pride and sent an embassy to the sulking hero. Odysseus, master of persuasive words, led the delegation that included Ajax the Great and Old Phoenix, who had helped raise Achilles from childhood. They found him in his shelter, playing the lyre and singing of heroes' deeds, a bitter irony lost on none present. His reception of their pleas was cold as winter seas. Agamemnon's offered gifts, magnificent though they were: 7 tripods, 10 talents of gold, 20 cauldrons, 12 prize-winning horses, 7 skilled women, the return of Briseis herself untouched, cities to rule, and the hand of a royal daughter in marriage. These treasures seemed to Achilles no more valuable than pebbles on a beach. "You cannot bribe away dishonor with gold," he told them, his voice carrying the finality of doom. "The man who fights hard and the coward who cowers receive equal shares if death takes them both. I have lost dear comrades winning glory for Agamemnon's cause, while he sits safe in his tent, growing fat on the spoils others have won. No, I will not return to battle for his sake. Tomorrow I sail for home, where a long life awaits me, though without the glory that could have been mine here beneath Troy's walls. The embassy returned to Agamemnon with empty hands and heavier hearts. That night, the Greeks slept uneasily while Trojan watchfires burned like fallen stars across the plain. In the morning, they knew Hector would complete his victory and turn their proud fleet into a funeral pyre. Yet, among the Myrmidons, one figure wrestled with loyalties torn between friendship and duty. Patroclus, Achilles' beloved companion since childhood, felt his heart breaking as he watched former comrades die, while his friend remained implacable in his wrath. The crisis reached its peak when Hector's assault broke through the Greek fortifications and enemy fire began consuming the ships themselves. The sight of flames licking at the black hulls was more than Patroclus could bear. With tears streaming down his face, he approached his dearest friend and made a plea that would reshape the course of the war. If you will not fight yourself, at least let me lead the Myrmidons into battle wearing your armor. The sight of your divine panoply might frighten the Trojans long enough for our people to catch their breath. Achilles felt something crack within his chest, a sound like ice breaking on a winter river. His beloved companion stood before him, asking not for gold or glory, but simply for the chance to die in his place. The offer was made with such innocent courage, such pure-hearted devotion, that even a hero's pride must bend before it. Yet even as he granted this request, Achilles felt the cold touch of prophecy. His divine mother had granted him glimpses of what was to come, and he knew with terrible certainty that he would never see his friend return alive. "If you must go," he said at last, his voice thick with emotions he dared not name, "then hear my words and set them deep in your mind. Drive the enemy from the ships, that much I grant. But when you have cleared them away, come back. Do not be carried away by the joy of battle to fight without me, or you will diminish my honor. Turn back when you have brought safety to the ships, and let others fight it out on the plain." The transformation of Patroclus unfolded like sunrise breaking over the sea. Where moments before stood a gentle youth more fitted for music than slaughter, now appeared a figure terrible in war. Divine armor gleaming like captured starlight, he seemed almost to be Achilles himself returned to the fray. Only the great spear remained untouched, that ash shaft cut from Mount Pelion's peak, tipped with bronze and balanced for the hand of the son of Peleus alone. The Myrmidons gathered around their borrowed champion like wolves scenting blood. These men had waited through long months of inaction, their battle fury bottled up like wine in a cracked jar. Now, seeing their lord's armor and believing their lord himself had returned to lead them, they howled their joy to the uncaring sky. When Patroclus led them into battle, the effect was like lightning from a clear sky. Trojans who had learned to fear that gleaming bronze fell back in dismay, believing the son of Peleus had finally cast aside his wrath. The young warrior drove his chariot through the press like a god walking among mortals, his borrowed spear drinking deeply of enemy blood, while his voice rang out with battle cries that sounded almost like those of his beloved friend. Ship after ship was saved from the flames, and the great breach in the Greek wall became a gate through which death flowed backward toward Troy. Yet even in the sweet wine of victory, the seeds of disaster took root. The gentle youth who had once played the lyre and tended wounds found himself drunk on slaughter, intoxicated with the power that flowed through divine bronze. Each fallen enemy fed the fire in his blood. Each cry of fear from Trojan throats made him feel more godlike, more invincible. The warning words of Achilles faded like morning mist before the blazing sun of triumph. What need for caution when the enemy fled? What use restraint when victory beckoned just beyond the next charge? In his borrowed glory, Patroclus felt capable of any deed, worthy of any honor. He saw himself driving through Troy's gates, standing triumphant on her citadel, claiming glory that would echo through the ages. But on Olympus, Apollo Farshooter watched with growing alarm as events spiraled beyond what fate had decreed. This mortal boy in borrowed plumes drove too far, reached too high, threatened to upset the careful balance the immortals had woven. 3 times Patroclus assaulted the walls of Troy itself, his borrowed courage carrying him where even Achilles might hesitate to venture. 3 times Apollo himself beat him back, the god's immortal hands pressed against his shield, divine voice thundering warnings that echoed across both earth and heaven. But the youth, drunk on victory and divine armor's power, made a 4th attempt and sealed his doom with his own ambition. Apollo's rebuke came like judgment itself. Give way, Zeus-born Patroclus. It is not fated that proud Troy be sacked by your spear, nor even by that of Achilles, who is far greater than you. The words carried the weight of cosmic law, but the damage was done. The god strode among the defending ranks, his divine presence kindling fresh courage in hearts grown cold with fear. Hector, greatest of Priam's sons, saw the borrowed armor gleaming in the press and knew his moment had come. The duel that followed unfolded with the terrible inevitability of tragedy. Patroclus, for all his gentle heart and borrowed courage, was not Achilles. The divine armor could make him appear invincible, but it could not grant him the skill of hands that had trained since childhood, the strength of limbs blessed by immortal blood, the terrible experience of one who had never known defeat. When Hector's spear, guided by divine will and mortal skill, found the gap between breastplate and helmet, bronze met flesh with a sound like tearing silk. As Patroclus fell, his borrowed armor scattering around him like petals from a dying flower, his last words carried prophecy more terrible than any oracle's pronouncement. You boast now, Hector, but to you I say that death and powerful fate are near. By the hands of noble Peleus' son, you shall be slain. The sound that broke from Achilles' throat when he learned of his friend's death echoed across the wine-dark sea, a wail of grief so pure and terrible that even the immortals paused in their machinations to listen. Thetis heard her son's cry across the depths of ocean and rose from her silver chambers like dawn breaking over mountains. Her immortal beauty marked by sorrow that ran deeper than the sea itself. "My son," she whispered, her voice like waves breaking on shingle. "Why do you weep? What sorrow has come to your heart?" But she knew the answer even as the words left her lips, for the threads of destiny were visible to her immortal sight. The son of Peleus lifted his head, his eyes red with weeping, his voice cracked with anguish. "Mother, all that the Olympian promised me he has brought to pass, but what pleasure do I have in this since my dear companion has perished? Patroclus, whom I loved above all other companions as much as my own life, I have lost him, and Hector, who killed him, has stripped away the armor, that beautiful armor, a wonder to see, which the gods gave to Peleus as a glorious gift. Would that you had stayed among the deathless sea nymphs, and that Peleus had taken a mortal wife. But now you must suffer countless griefs in your heart for your dead son, whom you will never again receive returning home, since my heart does not bid me live and remain among men, unless Hector first loses his life struck down by my spear and pays the price for Patroclus's slaughter. The words sealed his fate, as surely as bronze seals a tomb. Silver-footed Thetis wept tears that fell like rain upon the wine-dark sea, for she knew what this choice meant. Her son, her only child born of her union with mortality, chose the short path that leads to immortal glory and early death. No power in heaven or earth could turn him from this course now that love had been transformed into wrath, gentleness into fury, the protector into the destroyer. In the divine forges beneath Mount Olympus, Hephaestus the smith labored through the night, his mighty hammer ringing against anvils that had shaped the weapons of gods. The armor he created surpassed all mortal craft, bronze that gleamed like captured starlight, a shield that bore upon its surface the entire world in miniature, greaves that sang with power when they moved. When silver-footed Thetis bore these gifts to her grieving son, she found him still lying in the dust beside his friend's corpse, his divine features ravaged by sorrow deeper than mortal understanding. The transformation began the moment bronze touched flesh. Where grief had made the hero weak as a child, divine craft now made him terrible as a god. This was no longer the sulking youth who had withdrawn from battle over wounded pride. This was wrath incarnate, vengeance given form, death walking upright in the shape of man. His war cry, when it came, shook the very foundations of Troy's ancient walls. 3 times he shouted his fury to the morning sky, and 3 times the defenders fell back in terror from the sound. When Achilles finally strode onto the battlefield, the very earth seemed to recoil beneath his feet. His armor blazed like a second sun. His divine spear thirsted for blood, and from his shield radiated power that made strong men weak and brave men flee. Even his immortal horses seemed to sense the doom that rode with their master. As he mounted his chariot, one of these divine steeds suddenly found voice and spoke prophecy that chilled the blood. We shall bear you swift as the wind today, mighty Achilles, but your day of death is near. We are not to blame, but a great God and powerful fate. The hero's response rang with acceptance of destiny and defiance of death itself. Xanthos, why do you prophesy my doom? You need not. I myself know well that it is my fate to die here, far from my dear father and mother. But still, I will not stop until I have driven the Trojans to their fill of war. The slaughter that followed exceeded anything the war had yet witnessed. Where Achilles rode, the earth grew black with blood, and the river Scamander began to choke on corpses. Trojans fell like wheat before the reaper's blade, their names remembered only in the poet's catalogue of the dead. But it was not enough for the hero's fury. Simple killing could not satisfy wrath that burned with the heat of stars. He drove the fleeing enemy into the sacred river itself, turning its clear waters red with blood, filling its course with so many corpses that the current slowed to a crawl. Here, In the sacred stream that had flowed pure since the world began, he committed acts that made the very gods recoil in horror. The river god Scamander could endure no more, rising from his polluted waters in the form of a man, his voice booming across the battlefield. Son of Peleus, you surpass all mortals in might and in evil deeds too, for the gods are always helping you. If Zeus has granted you to destroy all the Trojans, at least drive them from my stream and do your grim work on the plain. My lovely waters are filled with corpses, and I cannot pour my current into the divine sea, choked as I am with the dead, while you go on killing ruthlessly. But divine madness had seized the hero completely. His response was to leap into the water itself, spear flashing like lightning. The tale of Achilles' wrath reaches its thunderous climax, but the echoes of that divine fury will resonate through eternity. Yet as one epic ends, another begins. From the wine-dark waters of the Aegean, where heroes once sailed toward glory and doom, we must now turn our gaze to an entirely different realm of divine power and cosmic order. Far across the Mediterranean, beyond the shores where Trojan pyres once burned, lies a land where gods walk among mortals in forms both terrible and beautiful. Here, beneath the shadow of Mount Olympus, unfolds a tapestry of divine politics, cosmic battles, and eternal struggles that make even the Trojan War seem like a mortal squabble. This is the realm of Zeus the Thunderer, Hera the Queen of Heaven, Poseidon the Earth Shaker, and countless other immortals whose passions, rivalries, and loves shape the very foundations of the universe. These are beings who predate human civilization, who witnessed the birth of the cosmos from primordial chaos, who fought titanic wars that shook the pillars of creation itself. The stories we're about to explore don't merely tell of gods and monsters, but reveal the ancient Greek understanding of how the world came to be. Why does the sun rise each day? How were mortals created? What forces govern love, war, wisdom, and death? The answers lie not in dry philosophical treatises, but in tales of divine passion, cosmic rebellion, and the eternal dance between order and chaos. From the very beginning, when chaos yawned open like a vast abyss, and the first powers stirred in the darkness, to the establishment of Zeus's reign atop Olympus, these myths chart the evolution of divine authority and cosmic law. They speak of a time when the universe itself was young, when the rules governing reality were still being written in blood and starfire. We'll witness Kronos, the Titan Lord, devouring his own children in desperate fear of prophecy. We'll see Zeus's thunderbolts splitting the sky as he wages war against his own father. We'll watch as the Olympians divide the cosmos among themselves, each claiming dominion over their chosen sphere of influence. And we'll discover how mortals came to be caught between these divine forces, pawns in games whose stakes are nothing less than the fate of existence itself. These aren't merely stories of individual gods, but the biography of the universe itself. Every lightning flash carries echoes of Zeus's victory over the Titans. Every earthquake reminds us of Poseidon's fury. Every wise decision reflects Athena's guidance, while every act of love bears Aphrodite's touch. The Greeks understood that their gods were not distant, perfect beings dwelling in serene isolation. Instead, They were intensely personal forces who felt every emotion known to mortals, but magnified to cosmic proportions. When Zeus fell in love, his passion could reshape kingdoms. When Hera felt jealousy, her wrath could pursue victims across the known world. When Ares lusted for battle, entire civilizations trembled. Yet these divine beings, for all their power, remained bound by forces greater than themselves. Fate, that inexorable weaver of destiny, spared neither god nor mortal from her designs. Even Zeus, mightiest of the Olympians, could not alter what the fates had decreed. This tension between divine power and cosmic necessity creates a drama more compelling than any mortal conflict. The myths reveal a universe in constant motion, where every force has its counterforce, every power its limitation. Apollo brings light, but his twin Artemis guards the darkness of the hunt. Aphrodite inspires love, but Ares kindles the hatred that love betrayed can become. Athena grants wisdom in war, while Dionysus offers the madness that breaks all rational plans. In the beginning, there was only chaos, not mere disorder, but the fundamental void from which all existence would emerge. From this primordial emptiness came the first powers: Gaia, the earth; Tartarus, the abyss; Eros, the force of attraction; Erebus, the darkness; and Nyx, the night. These were not yet gods as mortals would understand them, but cosmic principles given consciousness and will. Gaia, wide-bosomed earth, became the foundation upon which all later creation would rest. From her fertile depths, she brought forth Uranus, the starry sky, to be her equal and her mate. Their union produced the first generation of divine beings, the 12 Titans, embodiments of cosmic forces and natural phenomena, the 3 Cyclopes with their single blazing eyes, and the 3 Hecatoncheires, 100-handed giants whose strength surpassed all measure. But even in this earliest age, conflict and betrayal poisoned the divine realm. Uranus, fearing the power of his children, imprisoned them within Gaia's depths, causing her agonizing pain. Her suffering gave birth to the first great cosmic revolution, as she fashioned a sickle of adamant and urged her children to rebel against their tyrannical father. Only Kronos, youngest and most cunning of the Titans, possessed the courage to act. In the darkness before dawn, as Uranus descended to embrace Gaia, Kronos struck with the divine sickle, castrating his father and casting the severed genitals into the sea. From the bloody foam arose Aphrodite, goddess of love, while from the drops that fell upon the earth sprang the Furies, those terrible avengers of blood guilt. With Uranus overthrown, Kronos claimed dominion over the cosmos, ruling what the Greeks called the Golden Age. Under his reign, mortals lived without toil or sorrow, sustained by the earth's abundance, knowing neither old age nor death. Yet the new ruler harbored the same fears that had driven his father to tyranny. Oracle warned that one of his children would overthrow him as he had overthrown Uranus. Kronos' solution was simple and terrible. As each child was born to his wife Rhea, he swallowed it whole. One by one, the future Olympians, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon vanished into their father's gullet. But when Rhea bore her sixth child, Zeus, she had prepared a desperate deception. Wrapping a stone in swaddling clothes, she presented it to Kronos, while spiriting the infant away to a hidden cave on Crete. There, nursed by the goat Amalthea and protected by the Curetes, who drowned his cries with the clash of bronze shields, Zeus grew to divine manhood. When he reached maturity, he returned in disguise to his father's court and, with the help of the Titaness Metis, prepared a potion that forced Kronos to vomit up his swallowed children. The war that followed would reshape the very structure of reality. For 10 years, the Titanomachy raged across the cosmos as Zeus and his siblings battled their father and the older generation of gods. The earth trembled with the force of their conflict. Mountains were hurled like stones, and the very foundations of the world shook. Victory came only when Zeus freed the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires from their prison in Tartarus. Grateful for their liberation, the Cyclopes forged the weapons that would define the Olympians forever. Thunderbolts for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon, and a helmet of invisibility for Hades. The Hecatonchires brought their immense strength to bear, hurling hundred-handed volleys of boulders that overwhelmed the Titans' defenses. The defeated Titans were cast down into Tartarus, that bronze-gated prison as far below Earth as Earth is below the sky. There they remain, bound in eternal darkness, while the Hecatonchires stand guard to ensure they never again threaten cosmic order. Only Atlas received a different punishment, condemned to hold up the heavens for all eternity, his mighty shoulders bearing the weight of the sky. With victory achieved, the three brother gods divided the cosmos among themselves. Zeus claimed the heavens and the right to rule, Poseidon took dominion over the seas, and Hades descended to reign over the underworld and its countless dead. The earth itself remained common to all, though Zeus's authority as king of the gods extended over every realm. But even this new order faced challenges that tested its foundations. The earth, mourning her imprisoned Titan children, gave birth to new monsters to threaten Zeus's reign. The Gigantes, born from the blood of castrated Uranus, rose in rebellion, their serpentine legs allowing them to scale the very heights of Olympus. Only through the combined efforts of gods and heroes, for prophecy declared that the giants could not be defeated by divine power alone, were these earthborn challengers finally overcome. More terrible still was Typhoeus, the youngest child of Earth and Tartarus, a monster so vast and fearsome that even the gods fled in terror at his approach. With 100 dragon heads breathing fire, voices that could mimic any sound, and strength that shook the cosmos, Typhoeus seemed destined to overthrow the Olympian order entirely. Only Zeus stood firm, and their battle was so fierce that the very elements recoiled. Fire and flood, earthquake and hurricane marked their struggle, until at last Zeus's thunderbolts prevailed and Typhoeus was buried beneath Mount Etna, his fiery breath still escaping through the volcano's peak. These early conflicts established the pattern of Olympian rule. Power maintained through strength, but tempered by wisdom and the recognition that even divine authority must respect the deeper laws of fate and cosmic order. Zeus ruled, not as a tyrant like his predecessors, but as a king who understood that true sovereignty required the consent, if not always the enthusiasm, of the governed. The establishment of the Olympian pantheon brought order to both divine and mortal realms. Each god claimed their sphere of influence, their distinctive powers and responsibilities. Hera became Queen of Heaven and protector of marriage, though her own union with Zeus would prove stormy indeed. Poseidon's dominion over the seas made him second only to Zeus in power, while his earthquakes reminded mortals that the earth itself moved at his will. Athena, born from Zeus's head in full armor, embodied the wisdom of warfare and the arts of civilization. Apollo brought light, music, and prophecy, while his twin sister Artemis guarded the wild places and the hunt. Aphrodite inspired love in all its forms, from the sacred bonds of marriage to the passionate madness that could destroy kingdoms. Ares reveled in the brutal chaos of war. Hephaestus crafted wonders in his volcanic forges, and Demeter ensured the earth's fertility and the cycle of the seasons. Yet the Olympians were not content to remain aloof from the world below. Their loves, feuds, and rivalries constantly drew them into mortal affairs. Zeus's numerous affairs with both goddesses and mortal women produced heroes whose deeds would echo through the ages. Hera's jealousy toward these paramours and their children drove many of the great mythic cycles. Poseidon's conflicts with other gods over patronage of cities led to contests whose outcomes shaped civilization itself. The creation of mortals themselves arose from divine whim and cosmic necessity. After Prometheus stole fire from heaven to benefit his clay-formed humans, Zeus's anger led to the creation of Pandora, the first woman, whose curiosity would release all the evils that plague humanity. Yet even in punishment, the gods revealed their fundamental connection to mortal fate. For hope remained in Pandora's jar, ensuring that no matter how dark the world became, humans would never entirely despair. These myths served the Greeks not merely as entertainment, but as explanations for the fundamental questions of existence. Why do humans suffer? Because we bear the consequences of Prometheus's theft and Pandora's curiosity. Why do the seasons change? Because Demeter mourns her daughter Persephone's annual descent to the underworld. Why do we have both love and war? Because Aphrodite and Ares, despite their seemingly opposite natures, are drawn to each other in passionate union. The stories also provided moral instruction, though not always in ways modern readers might expect. The gods themselves were neither perfectly good nor utterly evil, but complex beings whose actions carried consequences that rippled through both divine and mortal realms. Their myths taught that power without wisdom leads to tyranny, that even the mightiest must respect fate, and that the universe operates according to principles larger than any individual will. As we prepare to delve deeper into these divine tales, remember that we're not simply exploring ancient superstitions, but encountering a sophisticated attempt to understand the forces that shape existence itself. Every thunderstorm echoes the cosmic battles we'll witness. Every act of love or war reflects the divine patterns established in these primordial times. The Greeks populated their world with gods because they understood that reality itself is alive with purpose and meaning. The myths we're about to explore reveal not just how the ancients explained their world, but how they found in that world evidence of powers and principles worthy of reverence, fear, and wonder. From chaos to cosmos, from Titan to Olympian, from divine conflict to cosmic order. This is the complete story of the Greek gods, told as the ancients themselves understood it, not as mere stories, but as the secret history of existence itself. The night sky above Olympus blazed with the fire of divine wrath, as Zeus, king of the gods, prepared to unleash his most terrible punishment upon the mortal world below. For too long, humanity had grown prideful, forgetting their place in the cosmic order. They had ceased their sacrifices, abandoned their temples, and worst of all, begun to believe they could rival the immortals themselves. But the Thunder Lord's rage was not born merely from wounded pride. A prophecy had reached his ears, whispered by the fates themselves, that among mortals would arise one who could challenge even his supreme authority. The assembly of the gods gathered in the great hall of Olympus, their immortal forms radiating power that would blind mortal eyes. Each deity bore the marks of their dominion. Poseidon, with his trident still dripping with sea foam, Athena in her gleaming armor of wisdom, Apollo with his silver bow that never missed its mark, and Artemis, huntress of the moon, her pack of divine hounds at her side. Hades had even emerged from his shadowy realm to witness this momentous gathering, bringing with him the chill of the underworld that made even the immortals shiver. Zeus spoke, his voice rolling like thunder across the marble halls. My brothers and sisters, the time has come to remind mortals of their proper place. They have grown too bold, too confident in their small achievements. They build towers that scrape the sky, create art that rivals our own divine beauty, and speak of wisdom as if they possessed understanding equal to ours. This insolence cannot stand. Hera, queen of the heavens, nodded in agreement, her peacock eyes flashing with vindictive satisfaction. She had long grown weary of Zeus's fondness for mortal women, and the thought of humbling the entire human race appealed to her wounded pride. Indeed, husband, their arrogance knows no bounds. Just yesterday, I observed a mortal woman claiming her beauty surpassed my own. Such hubris demands correction. But it was Athena who raised the crucial question that would shape the fate of humanity. Father, how shall we humble them? A plague would merely reduce their numbers. An earthquake would destroy their cities, but not their spirits. What punishment could truly teach them the vast gulf that separates mortal from divine? Zeus smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression, only the cold calculation of absolute power. We shall take from them the very thing that makes them believe they are our equals. We shall steal away their fire. The assembled gods fell silent, understanding immediately the magnitude of this punishment. Fire was more than mere flame to mortals. It was the foundation of their civilization. With fire, they cooked their food, forged their tools, lit their darkness, and warmed their homes during winter's cruel embrace. Fire had lifted them from the savage beasts of the field and made possible every achievement they claimed as their own. Without it, they would be reduced to shivering creatures, barely surviving in a hostile world. Hermes, messenger of the gods, was dispatched with his winged sandals to carry out this divine decree. like a golden arrow shot from Zeus's bow, he descended to the mortal realm and moved among humans invisibly, extinguishing every flame with a breath of divine wind. Hearth fires died to cold ash. Forge fires guttered and went dark. Even the sacred flames in temple altars, which had burned continuously for generations, were snuffed out as if they had never been. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. As darkness fell on that first fireless night, humanity huddled in their homes, wrapped in every garment they possessed, teeth chattering with cold. Mothers held their children close, unable to warm milk or cook grain into nourishing porridge. Blacksmiths stared helplessly at their cold forges, knowing that without fire, they could create no tools, no weapons, no plowshares for the coming spring. The elderly and infirm, who depended on warmth for their very survival, began to weaken and fade. But among the gods, there was one who watched this suffering with growing anguish. Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, was himself a Titan, one of the elder generation of divine beings who had ruled before Zeus's rise to power. Though he had sided with Zeus during the Great War against his fellow Titans, Prometheus had always felt a special kinship with humanity. He had watched them struggle and strive, had marveled at their ingenuity and courage in the face of overwhelming challenges. Unlike the Olympians, who saw mortals as amusing pets or convenient worshippers, Prometheus recognized in them something precious, the spark of potential that could, given time and opportunity, achieve genuine greatness. As days passed and the mortal world grew colder and darker, Prometheus could bear the sight no longer. He had seen infants die in their mother's arms for lack of warmth. He had watched grown men weep with frustration as they tried desperately to create fire through friction, only to fail again and again because Zeus had decreed that no mortal effort could kindle even the smallest flame. The proud civilizations that had taken millennia to build were crumbling in a matter of days, reduced to desperate scavenging for whatever warmth could be found. The Titan's heart, vast and ancient as it was, broke for these suffering creatures. He began to form a plan that he knew would bring down upon him the most terrible wrath of the King of Gods. But Prometheus had always been guided by principle rather than prudence. And the principle at stake here was justice itself. The punishment far exceeded the crime. Zeus's response was born of petty jealousy rather than righteous anger. In the depths of his divine mind, Prometheus began to craft a plan of stunning audacity. He would steal fire not from some earthly source, where Zeus might easily detect and prevent the theft, but from the very heart of Olympus itself. He would take divine fire, the pure essence of celestial flame that burned in the god's own realm, and carry it to the mortal world. It was a theft that would shake the foundations of the cosmic order, for never before had divine essence been given freely to mortals. The opportunity came during the feast of the winter solstice, when all the gods gathered in Zeus's great hall to celebrate the turning of the year. As immortal wine flowed and divine music filled the air, Prometheus quietly excused himself from the revelry. Moving with the stealth that only a Titan could possess, he made his way to the sacred hearth of Olympus, where burned the eternal flame from which all other fires in the universe drew their essence. The hearth was guarded by powerful enchantments, barriers that would turn away any unauthorized approach. But Prometheus was no common thief. He was one of the elder gods, possessed of wisdom and power that predated Zeus's reign. He knew the secret words that had been spoken at the universe's creation, understood the fundamental forces that govern divine fire. With infinite care, he reached into the sacred flame and withdrew a portion of its essence, concealing it within a hollow fennel stalk that would preserve its divine nature while hiding it from detection. The theft accomplished, Prometheus faced the most dangerous part of his plan, the descent to the mortal world. Zeus's attention was like a great eye that saw all things beneath the sky, and the moment divine fire appeared among mortals, the king of gods would know exactly what had transpired. Prometheus would have, at most, a few moments to complete his mission before Zeus's wrath descended upon him like a thunderbolt. He chose to appear first in the city of Athens, where mortal learning and achievement had reached their highest peak. The people there would best understand the gift he was bringing and could most effectively spread it to the rest of humanity. Appearing in the central agora as a figure cloaked in starlight, Prometheus revealed the hidden fire and spoke words that would echo through all of human history. Children of Earth, I bring you a gift that is not mine to give, yet which I give freely nonetheless. This is fire stolen from the gods themselves, the sacred flame that will restore your civilization and lift you to heights you have never imagined. But know this, the price of this gift will be paid not by you, but by me. Zeus's anger will be terrible, and his punishment will be eternal. Yet I count it worth any suffering to see you free from the cold darkness that has been imposed upon you. The people of Athens fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the presence of a god in their midst and by the magnitude of the gift being offered. With trembling hands, they reached out to receive the divine fire, and the moment it touched the mortal realm, every extinguished flame throughout the world burst back into life. Hearth fires blazed anew, forge fires roared with renewed strength, and the sacred flames in temples burned brighter than ever before. But even as humanity rejoiced in their salvation, the cosmic consequences of Prometheus's theft were unfolding. On Olympus, Zeus felt the disturbance in the divine order like a physical blow. His roar of rage shook the pillars of heaven itself, and the other gods cowered before his wrath. The theft was bad enough, but the identity of the thief made it infinitely worse. This was not the desperate act of some lesser deity, but a calculated rebellion by one of the most powerful beings in creation. Prometheus! The name exploded from Zeus's lips with the force of a hurricane. Come before me now! The Titan appeared instantly, for no being could ignore a direct command from the King of Gods. He stood unbowed before Zeus's throne, his noble head held high despite knowing the doom that awaited him. There was no point in denial or excuse. His guilt was written in the very fabric of reality. Zeus rose from his throne, lightning crackling around his form like living serpents. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority and boundless fury. You dare to steal from me, to undermine my judgment, to elevate these mortals against my express will. Do you not understand what you have done? You have given them not merely fire, but hope, not merely warmth, but the means to challenge the gods themselves. Prometheus met his lord's gaze without flinching. "I understand perfectly, Zeus. I have given them what they needed to survive the cruelty of your punishment. Fire is not yours alone to command. It belongs to all who can appreciate its beauty and harness its power. These mortals have proven themselves worthy of it through their suffering and their determination to endure." The king of gods stepped forward, his rage building to levels that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of Olympus. Worthy? These insects, these brief flickers of consciousness that live and die in the span of a divine heartbeat. You would risk everything for creatures so ephemeral they might as well be shadows. "Yes," Prometheus replied simply, "because in their brevity lies their beauty, because in their mortality lies their courage. They achieve more in their short lives than many immortals do in eons, precisely because they know their time is limited. They love more deeply, strive more desperately, create more urgently than we who have forever. They are worthy of fire, Zeus, and they are worthy of the freedom it represents." The philosophical argument only inflamed Zeus's anger further. He had expected groveling, pleading, perhaps an attempt at justification based on pity. Instead, Prometheus stood before him articulating a vision of mortal worth that challenged the very foundations of divine supremacy. This was not merely theft, but revolution. "Your words condemn you more surely than your actions," Zeus declared. "If you believe mortals are so noble, so worthy, then you can spend eternity contemplating their nature while experiencing the limitations of mortality yourself. Guards, seize him." Mighty beings appeared as if from nowhere, personifications of Zeus's will given form and substance. Kratos and Baia, the spirits of strength and force, flanked by Hephaestus himself, the divine smith whose own relationship with Zeus was complicated by old grievances. The god of the forge approached reluctantly, for he too had always felt sympathy for mortal craftsmen who struggled to achieve with crude tools what he could accomplish with divine ease. "My lord," Hephaestus said carefully, "perhaps the punishment could be—" "The punishment is mine to determine," Zeus thundered, "and it will serve as a lesson to any who might consider following this traitor's example. Take him to the edge of the world, to the Caucasus Mountains where the earth meets the sky. There you will chain him to the highest peak with bonds that cannot be broken by any force in creation. And lest the punishment seem too gentle for the crime, each day an eagle will come to feast upon his liver, tearing it from his body while he lives. Each night the organ will regenerate, only to be devoured again with the dawn. This will continue for all eternity, or until he learns proper humility and begs for my forgiveness." The sentence sent shockwaves through the assembled gods. Even by the standards of divine justice, this was extraordinarily harsh. To chain one of the elder gods, a being who had existed since the dawn of creation, to suffer endless agony with no hope of escape. It was a punishment that spoke to Zeus's fear as much as his anger. Hephaestus, bound by divine law to obey his lord's commands, began the terrible task with tears streaming down his immortal face. Using adamantine chains forged in the heart of dying stars, he bound Prometheus to the highest peak of the Caucasus, where the mountain's summit pierced the very dome of the sky. The chains were not merely physical restraints, but but metaphysical bonds that connected to the fundamental forces of reality itself. No power in creation could break them save Zeus alone. As the divine smith worked, Prometheus spoke words of comfort to him. "Do not weep for me, Hephaestus. Every link you forge, every chain you tighten, is another testament to the worth of those I chose to save. My suffering will be great, but it will not be meaningless. Fire burns in the mortal world because of what we do here today, and that fire will kindle achievements that will amaze even the gods." When the chains were complete and Prometheus hung upon the mountain face like a divine scarecrow, Zeus himself appeared to speak the final words of the sentence. "Let this be a lesson to all who witness it. This is the price of defying my will, of placing mortal concerns above divine order. Here you will hang until the end of time, a monument to the folly of rebellion." But Prometheus, even in his agony, found the strength to prophesy. "You speak of the end of time, Zeus, as if your reign were eternal. But I have seen what you have not, for my name means forethought, and I know that even kings of gods can fall. One day, your own son will challenge you as you challenged Kronos, and on that day, you will remember the firebringer who chose justice over safety." Zeus departed in rage, but the prophecy lingered in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The king of gods knew of the prophecy that spoke of a son who would overthrow him, and Prometheus's words carried the weight of true foresight. Yet pride would not allow him to rescind the punishment, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his divine certainty. The next dawn brought the eagle, a creature of supernatural size and malevolence, born from Zeus's own wrath and given form. Its beak was like a bronze spear, its talons like iron swords, and its appetite was as endless as the punishment it was designed to inflict. Each day, it came with the rising sun, tearing into Prometheus's immortal flesh to devour the liver that sustained his divine life. The Titan's screams echoed across the mountains, a sound of such anguish that even the stones wept in sympathy. Yet as the years passed, then decades, then centuries, Prometheus never broke. Through agony that would have driven lesser beings mad, he maintained his conviction that the theft had been just. Visitors occasionally made the perilous journey to the mountain's peak. Other gods who came to plead with him to submit. Mortals who came to thank him for his sacrifice. Spirits of the wild who were moved by his suffering. To all he gave the same answer. The fire was freely given and would never be reclaimed. Among the mortals, the gift of Prometheus became the foundation of a new age. With divine fire restored to them, humanity not only recovered from Zeus's punishment, but surpassed their previous achievements. They learned to work metals more skillfully, creating tools and weapons of unprecedented sophistication. They built cities that rivaled the beauty of divine architecture. They developed arts and sciences that explored the deepest mysteries of existence. Most importantly, they learned to use fire not just for survival, but for the pure joy of creation, forging beautiful objects, cooking delicious foods, crafting intricate machines that serve no purpose but to demonstrate the boundless ingenuity of mortal minds. The irony was not lost on the chained Titan. In trying to humble humanity, Zeus had inadvertently inspired them to greater heights. The knowledge that a god had suffered eternal torment for their sake filled mortals with a sense of obligation to prove themselves worthy of such sacrifice. They named their greatest achievements after the Firebringer, built temples in his honor, and told stories of his courage that inspired each new generation to strive beyond what seemed possible. But Zeus's wrath was not satisfied merely by Prometheus's punishment. The king of gods brooded in his palace, watching humanity flourish with the stolen fire, and conceived an even more diabolical revenge. If he could not reclaim the fire without losing face, he would give mortals a gift of his own, one that would turn their blessing into a curse. Summoning Hephaestus once more, Zeus commanded the creation of something unprecedented. A woman formed not from mortal flesh, but from clay and divine breath, shaped to be perfect in every visible aspect, while concealing within her nature the seeds of humanity's downfall. Each of the gods was commanded to contribute something to this creation, making her irresistible to mortal men while ensuring she would bring chaos to their ordered world. Aphrodite gave her beauty that would drive men to madness. Athena taught her domestic skills that would make her seem the perfect wife. Hermes granted her persuasive speech and a talent for deception. Hera bestowed upon her a nature that would always seek to dominate those around her. Apollo gave her musical talents that would entrance any listener, and Zeus himself breathed into her a curiosity so powerful it would override any consideration of consequences. When the creation was complete, she was named Pandora, meaning all gifted, for she had received something from every deity. She was given as a bride to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose name meant afterthought, and who had always been more impulsive and less wise than the Firebringer. Despite Prometheus's warnings sent from his mountain prison, Epimetheus was so enchanted by Pandora's beauty that he welcomed her into his home and made her his wife. As her wedding gift, Zeus presented Pandora with a beautiful jar, ornately decorated and sealed with divine locks. He warned her, with apparent concern, that the jar contained things too dangerous for mortal knowledge and must never be opened under any circumstances. Of course, this warning had precisely the opposite of its stated effect. Zeus knew mortal nature well enough to understand that forbidden knowledge was the most irresistible temptation of all. For days, Pandora resisted the urge to examine the jar's contents. But the curiosity Zeus had built into her nature grew stronger with each passing hour. She found herself drawn to the sealed container repeatedly, running her fingers along its smooth surface, pressing her ear against it to listen for sounds from within. Epimetheus, blinded by love and unaware of his wife's divine nature, dismissed her fascination as harmless feminine curiosity. Finally, when the compulsion became unbearable, Pandora broke the divine seals and opened the jar. What emerged was not treasure or knowledge, but a cloud of evils that had never before existed in the mortal world. Disease and death, hatred and envy, war and famine, despair and madness, all the sorrows that would plague humanity for the rest of their existence poured out in a dark torrent that spread across the earth like a plague wind. Pandora tried desperately to close the jar, but it was too late. The evils had escaped and could never be recaptured. Only one thing remained in the container: hope, which Zeus in his cruel wisdom had included as the most bitter joke of all. For hope would ensure that humans would never simply lie down and die, but would continue to struggle against the evils that now tormented them, making their suffering all the more exquisite. The release of these evils transformed the mortal world overnight. Where once humans had known only natural death from old age or accident, now they faced 1,000 forms of disease and premature demise. Where once they had lived in harmony, now jealousy and greed set brother against brother. Where once they had worked together to build their civilizations, now they made war upon each other with a savagery that shocked even the gods who had created the capacity for such violence. Yet even as these new sorrows afflicted humanity, the fire that Prometheus had given them continued to burn. With it, they fought against the evils Zeus had unleashed. They used fire to forge weapons to defend themselves, to create medicines to fight disease, to build shelters to protect their families, to light torches that drove back the darkness of despair. The very gift that had provoked Zeus's wrath became humanity's greatest weapon in the struggle against his revenge. On his mountain peak, Prometheus watched the unfolding tragedy with a mixture of anguish and pride. The suffering was terrible, and he knew he bore responsibility for provoking Zeus's retaliation. Yet he also saw how humans adapted and endured, how they used his gift not merely to survive, but to help one another through the new hardships they faced. The fire he had stolen had become more than a tool. It had become a symbol of the human spirit itself, unconquerable despite any adversity. As centuries passed, the story of Prometheus became the central myth of human civilization. Poets sang of his sacrifice, philosophers debated the meaning of his choice, and ordinary people drew strength from the knowledge that a god had deemed them worthy of eternal suffering on their behalf. The Firebringer became the patron of all who struggled against injustice, who risked everything for the sake of others, who chose principle over safety. The prophecy Prometheus had spoken on the day of his chaining slowly began to unfold. Zeus, haunted by the prediction that his own son would overthrow him, became increasingly paranoid and tyrannical. His marriages and affairs were calculated attempts to control fate, while his treatment of other gods grew ever more arbitrary and cruel. The very qualities that had made him a successful rebel against his own father, ambition, ruthlessness, the willingness to break ancient laws, now made him a tyrant ripe for overthrow. But the seeds of Zeus's downfall lay not in prophecy alone, but in the consequences of his punishment of Prometheus. By demonstrating that even the king of gods could be moved to petty revenge, Zeus had shown himself to be flawed and fallible. By unleashing evils upon humanity while allowing the fire to remain, he had created a situation where mortals suffered but did not despair, struggled but did not surrender. Most dangerously, he had created in Prometheus a martyr whose example inspired resistance to divine tyranny. The hero who would eventually free Prometheus was himself born from Zeus's paranoia. Heracles, son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, was driven to perform 12 seemingly impossible labors, partly to atone for crimes committed in divine madness, but partly to prove himself worthy of immortality. His final labor brought him to the Caucasus Mountains, where he found the chained Titan still enduring his eternal punishment. The meeting between hero and Titan was a moment that had been building for centuries. Heracles, despite his divine parentage, had always felt more kinship with mortals than gods. He had experienced their struggles, shared their sorrows, and fought against the same evils that Pandora had unleashed upon the world. Seeing Prometheus's suffering, understanding the nobility of his sacrifice, the hero made a choice that echoed the Titan's own defiance of divine authority. Drawing his bow, Heracles shot the eagle that had tormented Prometheus for millennia. The creature, born of Zeus's wrath, died with a shriek that echoed across all 9 realms. Then, using his divine strength, the hero began to break the adamantine chains that had held the Firebringer for so long. Each link that shattered sent shockwaves through the cosmic order, for the epic tapestry of Greek mythology is more than ancient stories. It is a profound exploration of the human condition. Through cycles of divine rebellion, cosmic upheaval, and the struggle between order and chaos, these myths mirror our battles with power, morality, and the search for meaning. From the primordial void to the fall of Troy, the Greeks provided a framework for understanding how divine forces shape mortal destiny, while heroes like Prometheus show that the greatest acts of courage often involve defying the gods. Ultimately, these timeless tales resonate because they capture the ongoing negotiation between creation and destruction, hope and despair, and challenge us to find our place within the eternal cosmic drama.